The sound of laughter carried beyond the velvet curtains, sharp and cutting, bouncing off the concrete walls of the backstage hall. People closest to the stage could feel it in their chest, like a slap they hadn't received, but still stung them all the same. Steven Seagal wasn't just laughing. He was dissecting, mocking, turning another man's craft into the punchline of his private show. The late 90s had given Los Angeles a strange kind of glamour. Neon signs bled into the night air, the city buzzing with the confidence of the entertainment industry at its peak. Inside the cavernous convention center, that glow turned into something heavier. Hundreds of seats filled, the heat of stage lights mixing with the smell of cheap coffee and too much perfume. This wasn't just a fan gathering. It was a summit, a collision of egos and disciplines, a spectacle pitched as a celebration of martial arts on screen and off. Cameras lined the aisles, ready to capture any flicker of drama, any clash of words that might sell tomorrow's headlines. Seagal knew it. He was feeding them exactly what they came for. He strutted across the stage in a black silk jacket that caught the light in dull, oily ripples. His gestures were slow but theatrical, the way he always moved, as though the world should wait for his body to finish speaking. He plucked a volunteer from the press row, a young reporter barely out of college, and twisted the man's wrist into a submission hold with the ease of someone opening a door. The journalist yelped, then tried to laugh it off as the audience tittered. "See?" Seagal drawled into the microphone, voice thick and nasal, punctuated by another chuckle. "That's real. That's structure, balance, control, not some cinematic windmill kicks." The crowd reacted like a divided jury. Younger fans, the kind who had grown up on late-night VHS marathons of Seagal's movies, laughed with him, nudging each other, feeding on his arrogance as if it were proof of authenticity. But further back, older men with stiff backs and folded arms, people who had followed martial arts long before Hollywood found a way to package it, shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered under their breath. To them, his jokes weren't harmless banter. They were a dismissal of decades of sweat, broken bones, and quiet discipline. Then he went further. "Chuck Norris?" Seagal scoffed, turning his head deliberately toward the side of the stage, as if he expected Norris to be lurking there already. His punches? They only work when the camera says action. That's choreography, folks. Tricks of editing. Out here, in the real world, they don't land. The words landed instead. A ripple cut through the hall. A few nervous laughs rose, but they thinned quickly, collapsing into a low murmur that filled the space like static. Everyone knew this wasn't just another joke. Norris wasn't just another name. People leaned forward in their seats. Some turned their heads toward the curtain, instinctively checking if the man himself might appear. The journalists smelled blood. A hand shot up, then another, until one finally caught the host's attention. A voice, clear and steady, broke the haze. "Chuck, what do you say to that?" The room stilled in an instant. It was the kind of silence that didn't just happen. It pressed down, flattening laughter, dragging time out long enough for every eye to swing toward the wings of the stage. Seagal grinned, soaking it in, convinced the pause was his victory, proof that no answer would come. His laughter echoed once more, this time thinner, trying to stretch across a silence that was no longer friendly. In that hush, the air grew heavier. You could hear the faint whir of the cameras adjusting their focus, the restless shift of bodies in their seats, the muted cough of someone regretting the sound the moment it left their throat. The tension was no longer about Seagal's arrogance. It was about the possibility, the slim but thrilling possibility, that Norris might walk out and answer, not with words, but with presence. And if he did, what then? The question hung there, unspoken but electric. Because the audience wasn't just waiting for a response, they were waiting for a reckoning. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. He didn't rush. The curtain stirred, and Chuck Norris stepped out as if arriving early for something private. No uniform, no show. Just a pale blue shirt with sleeves rolled once, dark jeans, worn boots. A man who hadn't dressed for a stage. The room shifted instantly. Shoulders straightened, cameras lifted, breaths caught. The lights seemed brighter. It wasn't charisma in the Hollywood sense, it was gravity. At center stage, Seagal finally turned, slow and deliberate. A grin stretched thin across his face. "Well," he said into the mic, "the legend is here. Maybe he'll show us something from the director's cut." A few chuckled, but it died halfway back. The older crowd, fighters, teachers, people who knew what years on the mat felt like, sat stone-faced. They weren't here for clever lines. Chuck stopped on the taped X at the center. His hands stayed loose at his sides. He let the silence breathe until the weight of it pressed on everyone. Cameras whirred, microphones buzzed. He lifted the mic, voice plain. "Real fighting isn't in the movies." A pause. "But it isn't in speeches either." The hall broke open with sound. Not polite applause, something raw, vindicating. People stood in patches. Others clapped with palms stinging. Seagal's jaw twitched, but the smile stayed fixed. The host tried to move on, too brightly. "Gentlemen, we're so honored." "Show us!" a man shouted from mid-row. Laughter burst, this time not at a joke, but at honesty. More voices followed. "Demonstrate!" "Let's see it!" Even journalists leaned forward. Seagal rolled his shoulders. "We can show, but I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings." Murmurs rippled. Chuck shifted one step aside, clearing the space at his feet, movements efficient, nothing wasted. The host tried again. "Maybe keep it light." Seagal flicked him off. "Light? Sure. We'll keep it cinematic. Isn't that right? Pick someone. Or—" he tapped his chest. "Me!" The crowd tilted forward, hungry for collision. Someone whispered, "It's happening!" And the phrase spread like fire. Chuck raised the mic again. "I didn't come here for games. And I won't talk anyone into respect." "That's earned," the line landed heavy. Applause rolled again, slower, heavier, like rain on a roof. The crowd wasn't an audience anymore. It was pressure, demanding a verdict. Seagal laughed, sharp. "So earn it." Right now, he stepped closer, closing the gap to a strip of floor humming with anticipation. Norris breathed once, steady, then lowered his mic. "If you want a demonstration," he said, "we'll demonstrate. But not for entertainment, for instruction." That word shifted everything. Teachers leaned forward. Students' eyes widened. This wasn't just spectacle anymore. It was a test of truth. The hosts grabbed the lifeline. "Tomorrow," one said quickly. "Workshop block, a joint session, both of you. Technique, principles." Seagal smirked. "Questions too? Like why some prefer choreography?" For the first time, Norris allowed the faintest smile, almost invisible. "Tomorrow works," he said, handing back the mic. The sound that rose wasn't cheers. It was agreement, like an oath. Phones lifted. Schedules rewrote themselves in people's heads. Backstage, a radio crackled. "We'll need mats," and clear the arena for 9 a.m. As Norris walked off, he passed the young reporter Seagal had bent earlier. The kid rubbed his wrist. Chuck paused just long enough to tap the back of his hand, a cue to loosen the shoulder. The pain eased from his face in an instant. Small gesture. Tremendous echo. Seagal watched him vanish into the curtain, grin stiff, jaw tight. The crowd kept buzzing. In that noise, a phrase caught and spread. He said yes. And he set the rules. By the time the hall emptied, the air smelled of sweat and ozone. The taped X at center stage remained, waiting. Tomorrow, it would mean more than placement for a spotlight. It would be the line neither man could step back from. By morning, the rumor had hardened into a schedule. Volunteers rolled out vinyl mats that smelled of rubber and bleach. A fresh X was taped at center stage, cleaner than yesterday's. Security walked the aisles in pairs, checking exits and counting cameras. The crowd pressed in early, restless. The air held the same tension as a gym before dawn. Sweat, coffee, and something unsaid. Seagal entered first. No silk jacket this time, only a dark kikogi top over loose pants. He bowed to the hosts with priest-like gravity, then to the audience with the smile of a headliner. Applause rose, but it leveled off quickly, like people careful not to give too much. He spoke into the mic, his voice steady, rehearsed. Principles, balance, connection, non-resistance. If you understand those, you don't need power. You let them hit nothing. He beckoned the same young reporter he'd twisted yesterday. The kid stepped up nervously, and Seagal folded him down with minimal effort, laying him across the mat as though he weighed nothing. The crowd gave polite sounds, uncertain. Then Seagal called a larger assistant from his own team. The man went flying farther, and the reaction was sharper, cameras snapping. Again, Seagal said, watch the feet, not the hands. He made a show of calm, standing still between moves, drawing the air into himself. When Chuck appeared, there was no announcement. Just a man in a plain white tee and loose pants, hands relaxed. The shift in the room was physical. The sound dropped, the air thickened. He nodded once to the hosts, once to Seagal, and stepped onto the taped X. Seagal smiled wider. Since we're teaching, let's be useful. Let me take your hand. We'll show them what happens when someone grabs. He reached with the confidence of a handshake he meant to own. Chuck let him. Seagal's signature spiral began, meant to flow wrist to elbow to spine, sending the man down. The chain broke. Chuck's elbow softened just enough, shoulder loose, palm rotating through instead of away. His other hand touched Seagal's forearm lightly, redirecting. The structure collapsed. Seagal was walked back 3 steps with the smallest push at his elbow. The crowd erupted. Laughter, shouts, gasps. Seagal forced a laugh of his own. Good! He used my line against me. But if he resists? He went again, quicker. Chuck's hips turned, his frame absorbed the pressure, and the trap met air. No flourish, just clarity. The older martial artists in the seats murmured to each other, recognizing the mechanics. Students leaned forward, wide-eyed, filming through shaky hands. Seagal pivoted to the mic. Important to know certain reactions are curated. He grinned at the cameras. Let's try at speed. The hosts froze, unsure. The crowd went silent, complicit. Seagal stepped in sharp, left hand fainting high, right hand grabbing low. Chuck's shoulders softened, ribs turned, and suddenly Seagal's heels skipped as balance slipped away. A few clapped, others hissed air through their teeth. Seagal's skin tightened near his jaw. One more. This time he body-checked. Contact hard enough to raise eyebrows. Chuck absorbed it, then returned a bump from his hip that sent Seagal's weight stumbling back. Not violent, just final. The crowd half rose, torn between applause and silence. Chuck picked up a mic at last. Demonstration doesn't mean agreement, he said. It means honesty. Then, quieter, angled to Seagal. We can keep this safe. It wasn't a threat. It was sharper than one. Seagal smoothed his sleeve, smiling. Of course. Safe. When he turned back, a training knife was in his hand. Aluminum, edge-taped. The crowd's mood dropped a register. A mother in the bleachers pulled her child closer. Common scenario, Seagal said, voice casual. Short blade. Close distance. Educational Chuck rolled his shoulder once, lifted empty hands. No stance, just readiness. The first jab came slow, a test. The second came faster, angling real. Chuck's forearm caught the wrist, not the blade, sliding to control the elbow. The edge skated harmlessly across sweat. Gasps echoed through the hall. Too close now for theater. The knife hand stopped because Chuck's frame told it to stop. For a second, Seagal's balance faltered, searching for an answer that wasn't there. He smiled, eyes hard. Again, Chuck's reply was almost inaudible. Full speed? Seagal dipped his chin. The room held its breath as one, 1,000 lungs suspended. The crowd wasn't an audience anymore. It was a diaphragm locked in anticipation. And from the wings, a radio cracked. Security to stage. Now. The call crackled through the wings. Security to stage. And Seagal laughed over it, the kind of laugh that insists nothing is wrong. He lifted the training knife, pinched between thumb and forefinger as if it were a harmless prop, and looked to the audience like they were co-conspirators in a prank. Relax, he said, voice booming. It's part of the show. The words didn't land. The room had already rotated to a different axis. People had seen the moment the blade stopped because Chuck's frame told it to stop, and they couldn't unknow it. The laugh didn't soften anything. It glazed over nerves that were already raw. "Let him try again," someone shouted. Another voice, younger, urgent. "Give him a chance." From the rafters it became a tangle. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The chant didn't swell like stadium music. It came in jagged bursts, honest, a little offbeat, like a crowd teaching itself how to be a chorus. Seagal lowered the knife and traded it to a stagehand without looking. He wiped his palm on his pants, then made a show of loosening his shoulders, head tilted, half-smile back on his lips. "You see," he told the nearest camera, "sometimes we illustrate what not to do." He pivoted toward Chuck. "Now, for something useful." He stepped in with a grip that wasn't a lesson anymore. Fingers dug into the meat just above Chuck's elbow. The kind of seize meant to control a man through the seam between bone and tendon. The motion was silent, clean. Security had reached the edge of the mat and stopped there, reading the weather, uncertain which way the wind would turn. Chuck's body told a different story. A small drop of the shoulder, weight sinking through the heel, sternum softening as if exhaling a secret. He brushed Seagal's thumb with his forearm, and the pressure vanished the way a trick knot falls apart when you pull the right string. It looked like nothing. It felt like dignity repairing itself. Cameras blinked furiously. You could hear shutters through the hush. Insects in summer. The longer Seagal's smile stayed on his face, the less it belonged there. He circled, palms open, moving with a ceremonial ease that read as delay. Chuck didn't chase, didn't pose. He stood as if the space belonged to him as much as the air did. "Gentlemen, let's pause," a host said, stepping forward with a safety smile that trembled at the edges. "We're all learning." "Let them finish," a cluster near the aisle yelled back. A wave of sound pushed the host a half-step off balance. The crowd had decided what this was. They were tired of being told. Seagal cut across the host's path with his body, casually impolite. "One more concept," he said to the audience, amplifying charm. "Control. When I connect, he's mine." He glanced at Chuck. that thin lid of cordiality lowering over something brighter and meaner. "Ready?" Chuck's breath barely altered. He didn't answer with words. The quiet drew the room tight. Even the HVAC rumble seemed to dim. Seagal moved with intent now, no flourish, no pause. A two-point contact, wrist and triceps, his hip angling to cage Chuck's center. It was a clinch disguised as instruction. His forearm bit in. Somewhere in the front row, you could hear the hard leather creak of someone's belt as they leaned forward too far. Chuck didn't fight the line. He made it slip. He let his forearm ride along Seagal's, forefinger lightly touching the seam inside the elbow, and turned a rib a few degrees. The whole shape rewrote itself. Seagal's frame had nowhere to settle. He blinked once, a quick, involuntary shudder against a draft that wasn't supposed to blow. The crowd exhaled laughter that wasn't mockery. It was release. The chant came back in pieces. Chuck. A pause. Chuck. Closer this time. Seagal dropped the smile. Not all at once, like a light dimming. The line of his mouth leveled, then flattened. He reset the cuffs of his top with careful fingers, as if seam straightness could stitch the moment back together. "Again," he said, voice neutral. He lunged sharper, hands snapping into a textbook arm drag meant to expose the back and fold the spine. Chuck's rear foot skated half an inch, heel carving a crescent in the mat. His hand slid to Seagal's wrist, not to stop, but to turn, and the drag opened into emptiness. A short push with the heel of Chuck's palm placed Seagal back where he'd started, precisely, like moving a glass to the ring its condensation had left. The cameras loved it. The crowd did not laugh this time. They made a noise closer to awe and discomfort, the sound you make when a trick keeps refusing to be a trick. "Stop here," the host tried, voice higher, palms out. "We need to keep this." "No," a dozen voices answered from different places at once. "Let it go." It had already gone. The master class was something you could put in a brochure. This was the moment brochures don't promise. Two security officers stepped onto the mat, hands up. A woman in a headset spoke into her mic with the focus of someone threading a needle. "We cut it now, or it becomes liability." The producer beside her didn't look away from the stage. "It already became something else," he said. "If we cut it, we'll have a riot." Seagal's face took on a sheen. Whether it was sweat or light didn't matter. The camera would make a choice. He didn't look to the wings for permission. He didn't ask the crowd for it either. He reached for Chuck again, quicker than before, sliding from grip to half-collar tie, weight pouring through his legs in a way no insurance form blesses. The sound that rose from the audience wasn't cheering. It was a hard inhale, metal on teeth. Chuck's hands came up, not high, not low, just there. And the collar tie never found purchase. A small tilt of his head set Seagal's forearm onto a track that led nowhere. Chuck's palm landed, almost polite, at the hinge of Seagal's jaw, a touch with the memory of force in it, but no force yet, just the whisper that it could be there. Seagal froze for a fraction. Not fear, calculation. What happens if he keeps going? What happens if he stops? The answer neither man said out loud filled the hall. The chant staggered, then rebuilt, more certain, louder. A woman near the back began to cry without sound, eyes brilliant, not understanding why. "Gentlemen," the host insisted, pressing in, voice thinning. One security officer met Chuck's gaze, saw nothing feral there, and still didn't move closer. The other looked at Seagal and saw something you see in drivers who have already started the turn and realized the lane isn't there. Seagal backed off a half step, then filled the space again, quick enough to tell the crowd he hadn't backed off at all. The movement was tidy, nearly beautiful, and mean. He reached for a body lock that would drive Chuck into the mat. Chuck's feet lifted and set down in a different order. Seagal's hands closed on absence, and the crowd laughed, helpless, the way people laugh when tension needs an exit. "Okay," Seagal said. The word had edges now. "Enough play." The last of the showmen fell through the trapdoor. He didn't glare. He focused. The faces of his assistants along the sideline changed. Tighter eyes, a kind of dread they were trained not to name. The knife was gone. The smile was gone. The microphone stand stood untouched at stage right, like a reminder from a different hour. Chuck made no answer. He breathed. He existed. The choice to be still was its own move. "End it," someone said softly from the fourth row, to no one and everyone. The host tried one more time, his script shredded. "We're out of time. We—" A surge in the seats drowned him. The crowd wasn't requesting anymore. It was authoring. The chant resolved into a steady beat that felt older than the building. Seagal stepped in without talk, hands open, not inviting, not teaching. The hush before the storm stretched thin enough to see daylight through. Security tightened their semicircle. The producer mouthed, "Don't touch them." The headset woman closed her eyes and counted, not sure what number she was aiming for. Seagal's mouth pressed into a line. He raised his hands in a guard separate from any dojo etiquette. The joke had drained out of him. The room felt smaller. Chuck's posture didn't change, and somehow everything about him did. The light made new planes in his face. For the first time all day, he looked like a man who might actually hurt someone if he had to, and would prefer not to. He gave a microscopic nod, maybe to Seagal, maybe to himself. The arena answered with silence so complete you could hear a banner rub its grommet against a cable high above. Somewhere, a cup hit the floor and rolled until it touched a shoe. Seagal shifted his weight forward, heel peeling off the mat. The master class was over, and what came next would not wait for anyone to bless it. He came forward without the grin. The last trace of theater was gone from his face. Seagal's hands came up not to demonstrate, but to impose. He crossed the mat in a glide that looked like inevitability. The crowd sensed it and went silent, the hush of a leash snapping. His first grab went for a collar tie, the forearm pressing toward Chuck's neck. Chuck tilted a fraction, his arm riding under the pressure, turning it into a slide. Seagal switched to a triceps drag, hips angled to fold the spine. Chuck's heel traced a tiny arc, ribs turning with the patience of a breath, and the trap found nothing to hold. The audience answered with a sound caught between gasp and laugh. Security shifted closer, but stopped. The cameras clicked like insects in summer. Seagal grew sharper. A wrist drag, a palm to the chest, weight behind it. Chuck let the shoulder empty for a blink, and the palm cut only air. The crowd exhaled in unison. Someone near the front whispered, "He can't catch him." Seagal didn't slow. He chained entries, grips, bumps, attempts to coil. The speed was no longer cinematic, but the tempo of drilled mechanics. Chuck read each one with the same economy. A rib turned, a hip sank, a forearm floated just where it needed to. He gave nothing extra. He refused to let the pace dictate him. Then Seagal escalated. He hooked behind the knee while driving his forearm into Chuck's chest. His hip turned for the throw that had ended countless reels. For a moment, the setup looked perfect. But Chuck adjusted a heartbeat earlier, folding slightly at the waist, foot wedging into place. The throw dissolved. Seagal's hip found no shelf. And then came the counter. A short touch to the body, low on the line where breath lives. It wasn't a strike. It was contact with weight behind it, just enough to send balance into chaos. Seagal froze, mouth open. He stepped back, hand going to his side, as though deciding whether to admit what his body already knew. The arena exploded. Shouts, laughter, camera flashes like lightning. A chant began ragged, then steadier. "Chuck! Chuck!" The sound was physical. It rattled in the rafters. Chuck stayed still, hands open, face calm. The restraint was louder than an attack. It said, "I could, but I won't." Seagal straightened, forcing the limp out of his posture. His jaw locked. He lunged again, body check hard, arms clamping low. Chuck's forearms swam through the space, spine lengthening instead of folding, and the clamp dissolved. A knee bump aimed to trip him only drew a half-step adjustment. The crowd murmured, half awe, half disbelief. Security looked helpless. The hosts gestured to cut it, but the roar drowned them out. Seagal circled, sweat shining under the lights. Cameras fed his face to the big screen, magnifying the thin vertical line of doubt etched there. He tried to bury it with anger. "Hit me!" he shouted, voice ragged. "Show them it's real!" The chant fractured, some pleading for calm, others begging for impact. The producer in the wings pinched the bridge of his nose, but didn't signal to stop. Nobody could stop it now. Chuck didn't move. He looked at Seagal not like an opponent, but like a man weighing cost against pride. Seagal spread his arms wide, daring. "Come on! Prove it!" The arena collapsed into silence. The buzz of the overhead lights was suddenly audible. People leaned forward without realizing. Chuck lowered his shoulders a fraction, placing the weight somewhere invisible. He breathed out slowly. Then he stepped in. He stepped in without rushing, his movement so small it seemed to shrink the space rather than cross it. For hours the day had been building toward noise, but now the silence was louder. The crowd, thousands of lungs suspended, made no sound except the tiny creak of plastic seats under shifting weight. Every camera stayed fixed, lenses drinking light. Even the air felt thinner, as though the building itself wanted to witness. Seagal's chest rose too fast. His arms were spread, the defiance already trembling at the edges. "Hit me," he barked. The words echoed up to the rafters, bounced against the steel beams, then fell away into the silence. "Make it real." Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. The request wasn't bravado anymore. It was demand. The last attempt of a man who had built his reputation on certainty and could no longer find it. Chuck didn't answer. His chin dipped slightly, like a man calibrating his breath to a slower rhythm. The fingers of one hand flexed once, the other rested calm near his ribs. He wasn't angry. He wasn't theatrical. He was measuring, watching not the face, not the voice, but the small betrayals in the hips, in the shoulders, in the desperate rhythm of breath. The provocation came. Seagal's heel sliding forward half an inch, his weight leaning to trigger the reaction. Chuck didn't take the bait. He waited for the change from show to need. And the instant it came, he moved. There was no wind-up, no cinematic spin. The strike traveled like a thought, foot to waist to arm, direct as current through wire. Compact, economical, precise. His hand met Seagal low on the torso, not the chest where men show toughness, but the hidden seam where breath is vulnerable. The sound wasn't dramatic, not a slap, not a crack, just a dull, final thud, like a heavy book dropped on a desk. Seagal's body knew before his mind did. His knees softened, his breath caught, his face opened around nothing. He sank, one knee folding to the mat, arms hovering out as if unsure whether to fall or fight. His hand went instinctively to his side, fingers spread over the place that now pulsed with memory. For a second, nobody believed what they'd seen. Then the dam burst. The crowd erupted with a force that shook dust from the rafters. Shouts, laughter, applause, the piercing cry of names chanted over and over. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Camera flashes tore white scars through the air. Some people jumped, some wept, some slapped strangers on the back as if they'd all lived through the same impossible story. Chuck didn't celebrate. He didn't bow or raise fists. He stepped just slightly aside, giving Seagal room to breathe. His hands stayed open, shoulders loose. A man who could have done more, and didn't. The restraint carried more weight than any finishing blow. Seagal stayed down longer than pride allows. His face didn't collapse, but the fight had drained. He tried to compose himself, to breathe through the spasm at his side, to stand without showing what had been taken from him. The assistants by the wall shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and recognition. Security held their distance. They weren't needed anymore. Chuck bent, just enough for his words to reach Seagal but still be heard at the back of the hall. "Respect what you don't understand," he said, voice steady, clear, "or it will break you." It wasn't cruel, it was instruction. Seagal lifted his eyes. Anger flickered there, but underneath it lay something heavier. Recognition. He gave a short, reluctant nod. The crowd caught it and roared again, louder, waves of sound crashing until the walls themselves seemed to pulse. The hosts stepped in, pale, voices trembling. We're going to end it here," one said, microphone useless against the roar. Nobody listened. The chant kept rolling, steady, relentless. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Seagal finally stood, pressing his palm against his ribs as though to keep something inside. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He left with his eyes fixed straight ahead, tidying nothing but his own posture. The cameras followed him, magnifying the hollow silence around his exit. Chuck walked calmly past him, not brushing shoulders, not forcing recognition. As he passed, he tapped Seagal's elbow with 2 fingers, so light it was almost invisible. Not pity, not triumph, just direction. This way out. The chant didn't change rhythm. It belonged to one man now, and the arena knew it. At the edge of the mat, Chuck paused near the same reporter Seagal had humiliated on day 1. The young man no longer rubbed his wrist. The pain was gone. He looked at Chuck with eyes wide, mouth half open, as if waiting for words. Chuck gave only a small nod, the nod that said, "You're fine." That was enough. He turned toward the curtain. The lights threw a warm edge across his shoulders, his back, then swallowed him whole. He didn't take the roar with him. He left it behind, as if the noise belonged to the witnesses, not the man. On stage, the taped X had already started to peel at the corners. A volunteer bent to tear it up later, folding it into a square small enough to pocket. The mats would be rolled. The lights would cool. But the image wouldn't leave. The silence before the strike, the clean line after. Outside, the sun blazed indifferent. Traffic moved, horns honked, a siren howled blocks away. Yet every person spilling from the hall carried the same story, retelling it in fragments. He touched him once. He couldn't move after. It wasn't even a full punch. Words like timing, respect, control passed from mouth to mouth, already forming legend. In time, versions would spread. Exaggerations, edits, denials. Some would say it was staged. Others would swear they'd seen truth unclothed. But everyone who'd been inside remembered the moment the arena fell silent, the pause before the touch, and the way Seagal's body folded when myth met discipline. No one announced the moral. It didn't need to be said. It followed each witness home, stubborn and simple. Noise talks. Strength insists. But it's quiet that decides.